You've seen this pattern before, maybe in someone you know, maybe in yourself. A person who, for years, maybe their entire life, has stayed away from a certain private habit that most people quietly assume is universal. Not out of fear, not out of suppression, just absence. And what's interesting is not the behavior itself, it's the psychology behind it. Because people who never engage in that kind of self-directed physical release are not all the same. And once you understand what's actually happening in their minds, you stop seeing it as strange and start seeing it as a completely different way of processing desire, attention, and control. So let's start at the beginning. When most people experience physical urges, their brain treats it like a loop. A stimulus appears, tension builds, and then the brain looks for the fastest possible way to release that tension. It's efficient, it's automatic, and over time, it becomes a habit loop. But there's a small group of people whose brains don't follow that loop in the same way. Not because they don't feel anything, they do. But their mind does something different with that energy. Instead of directing it inward, they redirect it outward or upward. Or sometimes, they just let it pass without reacting at all. And this is where it gets interesting. Because for many of these people, the key trait is high cognitive control. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and restraint, is unusually active in moments where others switch to autopilot. Where one person feels an urge and follows it, they pause. Not dramatically, not consciously every time, but just enough to break the automatic cycle. And that tiny pause changes everything. Now, before you assume this is about discipline or willpower, it's not always that simple. In some cases, it's actually about attention wiring. Some people are deeply engaged with external goals, ambitions, ideas, long-term visions. Their brain is constantly occupied, not in a distracted way, but in a focused, forward-moving way. And when the mind is strongly attached to something meaningful, short-term urges don't feel as compelling. Not because they're weak, but because they're competing with something stronger. Think about it. If your brain is chasing a purpose, building something, or even just deeply absorbed in thinking, then a temporary sensation doesn't always win that competition. Now here's where it becomes more personal. Another group of people avoid this behavior not because of focus, but because of association. Somewhere along the way, their brain linked that act with discomfort, guilt, awkwardness, or simply irrelevance. And once that association is formed, the brain quietly categorizes it as not worth it. No dramatic resistance, no internal battle, just disinterest. And disinterest is incredibly powerful, because you don't need discipline to avoid something you don't feel drawn toward. But there's another layer, one that most people don't talk about. Some individuals have a different relationship with intimacy itself. They don't separate physical sensation from emotional context as easily. For them, connection matters more than release. Presence matters more than stimulation. And without that connection, the entire experience feels incomplete. So instead of engaging in a solo version of it, they simply don't. Not as a rule, not as a sacrifice, just as a natural preference. Now here's the part that often gets misunderstood. People assume that those who avoid this habit are either extremely controlled or extremely restricted. But in reality, many of them are neither. They're just wired differently. Their brain doesn't assign the same level of importance to it. And memory plays a role here too. Just like some people forget names because their brain prioritizes meaning over labels, these people often prioritize depth over impulse. They remember conversations, emotions, ideas, not fleeting sensations. And because of that, their mental space gets filled with different things. Now, does this mean one way is better than the other? No. That's the wrong question. Because psychology isn't about judging behavior, it's about understanding patterns. And this pattern is simply one variation of how the human mind handles desire. Some people release it. Some people redirect it. Some people ignore it. And all of these are just different strategies of the same brain trying to manage energy, attention, and meaning. So if you've ever wondered why someone doesn't engage in something that seems normal to others, it might not be suppression. It might not be struggle. It might just be that their brain never gave it the same importance in the first place. And once you see that, you stop labeling it as unusual, because the human mind has never been one size fits all. It's a collection of different architectures, each prioritizing something slightly different. And sometimes, what someone doesn't do tells you more about how they think than anything they do.